Welcome back. Our church sanctuary is undergoing some renovation right now, so I'm going to speak to you from my home today. I hope that the lighting works and that the background is not too distracting. The video I'm making right now is one I wish I didn't have to make. I don't relish this very much at all, but I think I must. I've been talking about this book, Coming to Grips with Genesis, Biblical Authority in the Age of the Earth. And what I've said about it so far is that this contains a scholarly, in many ways persuasive, presentation of the traditional reading of Genesis 1, in which the days of creation are understood as literal 24-hour days. I've said that I don't believe that it's a watertight interpretation. I think that there are questions that can very legitimately be asked about it, but I think it's a good presentation. The authors clearly do believe that it's watertight, but it seems to at the same time they also hedge their bets a bit. What I mean is this. In addition to this very positive case for their understanding of Genesis, these authors inject into this book, running throughout the book, an undercurrent of rejection of modern science. Not just the rejection of specific theories of modern science, but really a rejection of science itself as a means by which we can obtain information about the world that might possibly have bearing upon the way we interpret the scriptures. We see this at many points in the book. I'm going to concentrate on a couple of them, one in this message, one in the next. I want to talk today about the foreword to this book written by Dr. John MacArthur. Now I need to say before I get into this that Dr. MacArthur is somebody for whom I have great admiration. I use his New Testament commentaries frequently in my own sermon preparation. I think he's an excellent commentator. I have great admiration for the books he writes, the sermons he preaches, his leadership of a college and a seminary, his international ministry. He is one of the outstanding Christian leaders of our time, and I admire him. I also have a personal debt of gratitude toward him that is very great, because when I wrote a book myself some years ago, Dr. MacArthur rather quickly endorsed it. And there's no question that Dr. MacArthur's endorsement made a difference in the number of readers that book found. So it is with trepidation and with regret that I critique Dr. MacArthur's foreword to this book, but I think that I really must. There are a couple of statements he makes in this foreword that I think simply cannot go unchallenged. The first one comes on page 10 of the book. He is talking about evolution. He is saying that evolutionists have solved, so to speak, the problem of explaining evolution by extending the past almost infinitely. And he says that geologists and astronomers have helped them in this. Every time a challenge to current evolutionary theory arises, geologists and astronomers dutifully tack billions and billions of eons onto their theories about the Earth's age, adding however many ancient epochs are deemed necessary for some new impossibility to be explained. Let me read it again. Every time a challenge to current evolutionary theory arises, geologists and astronomers dutifully tack billions and billions of eons onto their theories about the Earth's age, adding however many ancient epochs are deemed necessary for some new impossibility to be explained. I first read this several years ago when this book first came out, and I was appalled by this statement, appalled that he would write this, appalled that the editors would let it get by. I have read it many times since then. I am at least as appalled now as I was when I first read it. This is a very insulting thing for Dr. MacArthur to say. He is saying that astronomers and geologists are people of such low morals, people of such low professional standards of ethics, that they are willing to prostitute their professional skills, their scientific skills, to provide ancient eons of time out of whole cloth, eons that they know did not exist, simply in order to get the evolutionists out of trouble when they can't explain some evolutionary development. He is accusing astronomers and geologists of being disreputable, dishonest people who cannot be trusted. This is, in the first place, extremely insulting. I don't believe for a moment that Dr. MacArthur is trying to drive scientists away from the Christian faith. That would be in contradiction to what he spent his life doing, which is trying to be an ambassador for Christ. But I have to say, if Dr. MacArthur wanted to drive scientists away from the Christian faith, I can't think of a better way to do it than to insult all astronomers and geologists in this way. This is fighting language. Any scientist who reads this even if not an astronomer or a geologist, is going to be offended by this. It seems to me completely inappropriate. Is there any truth in it? Well, I can't discount the possibility that Dr. MacArthur knows something I don't know, but I don't believe there's any truth in this charge at all. Darwin published Origin of Species in 1859. By that time, geologists had believed for more than half a century that the Earth has to be very, very old. They didn't know how old, but they believed it was quite old, more than just a few thousand years old. So the belief that the Earth is old preceded evolution. In the years since then, what has happened? In the 19th century, there were estimates made of the Earth's age based upon scientific theories that were not correct. For example, that you could determine the Earth's age by measuring the amount of salt in the sea or by determining the temperature of the Earth. These things didn't work because there were factors that the scientists were not taking into account. In the early 20th century, with the advent of radiometric dating, the estimates, which in the 19th century had been in the millions of years, jumped into the billions of years. And at present, the estimate is something like 4.5 billion years for the age of the Earth. Over the past half century or so, I'd suppose that there have been changes in this estimate, maybe from 4.5 to 4.55 or 4.6 billion years old. Nobody has tacked on billions and billions of eons. And the changes in the estimates of the Earth's age have come about entirely in response to scientific progress. The development of radiometric dating, the increasing perfection of radiometric techniques, the availability of moon rocks and meteorites for astronomers and for geologists to study. These are the factors that have led to changes in the estimates of the Earth's age. I see no basis whatsoever for the claim that geologists and astronomers have dutifully tacked on billions and billions of eons to their estimates of the Earth's age because of some cry for help coming to them from the evolutionists. I think this is completely fabricated. I think there's no truth in it whatsoever. I think also that this charge is so vague and so meaningless that my only conclusion I can draw from this is that Dr. MacArthur is not trying to give us any information that will help us in understanding the history of science or understanding what's going on in geology and astronomy. He is instead simply trying to induce prejudice in us against astronomers and geologists. Why do I say this? Well, he says that these people have tacked on billions and billions of eons to their estimates of the Earth's age. What does he mean by eon? Geologists sometimes use this term in a technical sense to mean a billion years or many millions of years. In that sense, no one has ever tacked on billions of eons to estimates of the Earth's age because no one has ever tacked on billions of multiples of a billion to the Earth's age. If we did so, we would be speaking of an age of the Earth in the vicinity of 10 to the 18th power number of years. And no one has ever spoken of that. The estimate, as I said, is about 4.5 billion years. So he can't be using eon in that technical sense. The only other way I can think of that we use eon is a very colloquial way. We may say, I'm so hungry, it seems like eons since I had breakfast, in which case we mean hours. Now, if that's what Dr. MacArthur means, then yes, perhaps so. Perhaps people have tacked on billions of eons since the 19th century because we've gone from millions of years to billions of years. But this is meaningless. He doesn't define his terms. He simply throws this at us, billions and billions of eons, however many ancient epochs are deemed necessary. What Dr. MacArthur appears to be doing here is instilling in us a prejudice. He doesn't want us to pay attention to what astronomers and geologists are saying. He doesn't want us to take seriously their theories or their ideas. He's simply trying to make us believe that these people are so dishonest that we don't need to listen to them. It's interesting that he even brings astronomers into the picture here, since astronomy has relatively little to do with dating the Earth. It would appear that he does this because he wants to discredit not only geology but also astronomy. Now, I think that this is disrespectful. Highly disrespectful. And I think that that's unbiblical. Paul says in Romans chapter 13, verse 7, pay to all what is owed to them. Taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. We owe respect to geologists, whether we agree with all of their theories or not. We owe respect to them because of the countless hours they have spent trying to understand the rocks and understand the Earth. We owe respect to them because of what they have done that helps all of us. It is geologists who are able to tell oil companies where to drill for oil, or mining companies where to look for metals, or tell municipalities and builders what kind of seismic events to prepare for and plan for. Geology affects our lives in a very positive way all of the time. And to simply write these people off as dishonest scoundrels who would make up any story they needed to make up in order to support evolution is, I think, extremely disrespectful. And I think it's not Christian. I'm sorry to speak so strongly. I just think that I really have to. I think somebody has to speak to the Christian community and to anybody else who may be listening in at this point, especially any offended scientist, and say to them, this is not who we are. This is not who Christians are. Followers of Jesus Christ are not people who indulge in this kind of ad hominem attack against others in order to support or protect or defend our biblical interpretation. In 2 Corinthians 4, verses 1 to 2, Paul writes this, "Therefore, having this ministry by the mercy of God, we do not lose heart, but we have renounced disgraceful, underhanded ways. We refuse to practice cunning or to tamper with God's truth, but by the open statement of the truth, we would commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in the sight of God." Christians do not have a calling from God, a mandate from God, or permission from God to defend the Word of God or defend the gospel by saying things that are untrue and uncharitable about other people. That's not who we are. We renounce that. We do not do that. I hope that Dr. MacArthur himself will come to see this, and I hope that if this book is given a second edition, he will rewrite this forward and remove this statement. It's completely inappropriate. The second statement that Dr. MacArthur makes here that needs to be challenged has to do with the definition of science. Dr. MacArthur wants to say that science can have nothing whatsoever to say about the origin of the universe, how old the universe is, or how it came into being, or how old life is, or when life came into being. This is from page 12. I'll go even further. Science cannot speak with any authority about when the universe began, how it came into being, or how life originated on Earth. Science, by definition, deals with what can be observed, tested, measured, and investigated by empirical means. Scientific data, by definition, are facts that can be demonstrated by controlled, repeatable experiments that always yield consistent results. The beginning of the universe, by its very nature, falls outside the realm of scientific investigation. This won't do. It won't do for a couple of reasons. First of all, Dr. MacArthur is giving a definition of science that is far too narrow. He is saying that the only real science is experimental science, science that involves controlled, repeatable experiments that always yield consistent results. People who do science, or people who think about science, know that there's a lot more to science than that. Experimentation is an extremely important part of science. It's not the whole of science. Think about what Albert Einstein did. Albert Einstein did theoretical physics. When he came up with some of his most important ideas, he was still working as a clerk in a patent office with no access to any experimental apparatus whatsoever, as far as I know. Now, it's true that later on people did experiments to test the theory of relativity, but would you really want to say that Albert Einstein was not a scientist because he was doing theoretical physics? I don't think so. What about descriptive sciences like botany or entomology or ornithology? I know little about these sciences, but it seems to me that while experimentation probably has some role to play in them, it's not the major method that is used in these sciences. These sciences investigate, they observe, they dissect, they analyze, they compare, they categorize. They do experimentation when it's a possibility for them, but I doubt that that's the main part of their work. What about meteorology? We all benefit from the work of meteorologists. This is work that is done primarily by putting lots of stations around the world to see what's happening in the atmosphere and in the oceans, and then creating very complex computer models to predict what's going to happen next. It's not really experimentation. It doesn't produce repeatable experiments that always yield consistent results. And what about historical sciences? There's a whole class of sciences that look at things that are in the past that cannot be experimented on because they cannot be repeated. For example, forensics. If a murder is committed, the police investigating the murder can't go out and take a whole bunch of people and murder them in different ways to try to determine how it was done or who did it. There's no experimentation that is done whatsoever for the most part in this kind of work. Instead, what they do is they look for somebody who has the means and the method and the opportunity, and also for somebody who has in the motive and opportunity, also for someone for whom also they look for evidence that links this person to the crime. In other words, they're looking for the most plausible explanation of this particular event. Similarly with investigation of a plane crash. You don't take a bunch of planes and crash them to find out why this plane crashed. Instead, you begin eliminating possibilities. We don't think it was a missile strike because we don't see that kind of damage to the fuselage. We don't think it was a bomb for whatever reason. We don't think it was a bird strike. We don't think it was wind shear. You go down the list until you find the most plausible explanation for what has happened. Archaeology is an historical science. Archaeology is tremendously valuable to us. Archaeology helps us to understand, among other things, the world of the Bible. But archaeology does not proceed through experimentation, does it? Archaeologists find artifacts. They relate them to other things they find at the same strata and the soil. They try to understand these. They may try to date these using radiometric techniques. And they try to explain how these artifacts came to be in the soil and what they tell us about the life of the people who used them. They don't use experiments in this kind of science. What about geology? Well, geology is based upon experimental physics and chemistry, and geologists do laboratory experiments to determine how rocks or soils behave under certain kinds of conditions. But a great deal of geology consists of going out into the field, observing things, and then looking for the best possible explanation for why they are as they are. It's not primarily experimentation. So this definition that Dr. MacArthur wants to use is so extremely narrow that it excludes much of what everybody else thinks is science. Suppose that you did, though, decide to go with Dr. MacArthur's definition. What then? Would that mean that we no longer wanted to know why the murder was committed? And we wouldn't want the police to use whatever methods they could use to determine who the murderer was? Would it mean that we wouldn't care how the plane crashed? Would it mean that we wouldn't care what the artifacts meant that we found in the earth? Would it mean that we wouldn't care what the stones tell us about the earth's history? Of course not. We still want to know. We still want to know about these things. So even if you define science so narrowly that you exclude these fields of inquiry, they are still legitimate fields of inquiry. And we are not absolved of the responsibility of trying to understand them. And one more point about this. Dr. MacArthur does not like mainstream geology, but he does like flood geology, young earth geology. This book is dedicated to John Whitcomb. There is a foreword also here by Henry Morris. These two men started the modern field of flood geology back in 1961 with their book, The Genesis Flood. Were they doing experimental science primarily there? No, they weren't. They were doing essentially what other geologists do, looking for the best possible explanation of past events, but with this difference that they were looking only at explanations that were consistent with a very young Earth and with a worldwide deluge. It's not experimental science. So Dr. MacArthur's definition of science is simply too narrow. And even if we accepted it, we would still be obligated to try to understand why geologists and others say what they do. Here's what it comes down to. We can't defend a biblical interpretation by attacking other people, by demeaning their character or impugning their motives, by leveling unjust, unfounded accusations against them, or by indulging in some practice of defining knowledge in such a way as to discredit the work that they do. This is not legitimate. We still have to press on to understand why geologists and astronomers believe what they believe about the age of the Earth and the age of the universe. Well, next time I want to come back and talk about one other author in this book and his view of science. Thanks very much for watching.